Have you ever felt like you don't matter? Nothing in the world you do doesn't matter. Well, our sponsor this week wants to adopt you as a son or daughter of him. And this is good because he has a lot of influence. Hey, welcome back to the Word from our sponsor. As always, my name is David Dietrich. Our sponsor is God. You can become a person of influence by aligning yourself, by giving your life to Christ. This is something we talk about often in the show, but today we are talking about the book of Esther. I was actually in church 2 weeks ago, and the pastor was just talking about a proposition. It's Prop 1 that's going through California. It's not only affecting abortion, but a lot of parental rights and things like that. So there's a big push from conservative community, people who are pro-life, but also people just who are pro-parent, want parents to have influence and control over their children, not the state. There's pushback against that, as there should be. And he said something about where are all the pastors? Where are the pastors kind of speaking out against Prop 1? There's not many of them. And it got me thinking about positions of influence and what they're for. And it's brought me back to the book of Esther. So the book of Esther, I actually taught the entire book in one Sunday, and it's one of my favorite books because it is so story-driven. It's so cinematic, and there's unique things in it, like, God's never mentioned in Esther, and, Jesus, being the focus of both the Old Testament and the New Testament and kind of pointing towards him all the time. It's an interesting book because of the story aspect of it, that we're talking about this one person. But I think that's one of the things that makes it so powerful. The book of Esther, if you have not read it, go back, read it. It's so great. But book of Esther is about the king is having parties in the beginning. He summons his wife. She won't come. He is embarrassed by that, sentences her to excommunication. She has to go. Death and just like threat of death, like all these things. It's just this overreaction, as some would say. But she humiliated him in front of other leaders, so he comes back very strong against her, saddens him, and then is counseled to go and gather a bunch of virgins. Gather all these young women who are beautiful and pick one as a wife. Esther, who is an orphan and being taken care of by her cousin Mordecai, or uncle. It's a family kind of dynamic there. She's taken in as a daughter by her uncle, cousin, Mordecai. And the family relations are difficult. I don't know the family tree is what we call them. But she goes in and is raised by him and is summoned and taken in this gathering of women. So from there, she gets favor. She goes in. Now, first off, I want to say, this is a terrible situation for this young girl. She's a beautiful young woman. She's unmarried, and she gets taken by the king through force to, be a child bride, basically. And, we in the time and era that we live in look at that and think about how horrible it is. But on the other hand, this was a time when it was difficult to live, and you'd be in the king's household. You'd have all your meals. You'd have all of these things. There's a balance of kind of like our sensibilities and what was going on here. But it's still not an easy situation by any means, and not something that, God would have for people in the ideal. But it is what happened to Esther. And rather than, kind of complaining about it and allowing it to defeat her, she actually went and rose up to be the favorite of this harem that she was brought into. And then she goes in and is summoned by the king to, have relations with him, and comes out in the morning, and the king, loves her, decides he's going to make her queen. So this is Esther's story. This is kind of the start of it. And I want to look at chapter 4, where Esther is already queen. Mordecai has uncovered a plot to kill the king, reported that to Esther, been praised by the king for that, and then gets into this conflict with Haman, who wants everybody to worship him, basically, and Mordecai refuses to because he's a Jew. Haman finds out and then now wants to kill all the Jews. So there's been an edict gone out, and this edict to kill all the Jews by Haman, the king has signed. Haman's kind of, not fooled the king into signing it, but, won the king's favor to do this. King's not really thinking about it, doesn't really care that much about the subjects that are the Jews. It says, they don't want to worship us. So, yeah, you can kill them and you can take all their stuff, and that's fine. So Mordecai is in sackcloth and ash, and he's out in the city. The servants of Esther tell him about it, and he comes in and says, or they go out and he tells the servants what's happened. They come back and report to Esther. She says, well, I can't do anything. I haven't been summoned by the king. If I go into the inner court, he could kill me. And this is where we kind of pick up. In chapter 4, verse 12, and it says, and they told Mordecai what Esther had said. And then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise from the Jews from another place, but you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to this kingdom for such a time as this. So this verse is probably like the verse of Esther, and it's talked about all the time. But it made me think about just positions of influence. And I'm not calling out pastors specifically. I think that can be included in the critique or the push to Christians in our society in general. But whoever you are, whether you are a pastor, whether you are, a father, a mother, a plumber, a CEO, a doctor, a lawyer, wherever you are, God has given you a degree of influence, and it's for a purpose. And Mordecai is telling Esther that if you do not use your influence in the way that God intends you to be a light for him, to protect the innocent, to go out and change the world around you for the better. And of course, from the New Testament, that is through the gospel and truth of Jesus Christ, but not limited to head knowledge. It results into actions, right? What is pure and undefiled religion? Taking care of widows and orphans, right? It results in actions that we do. So if you are put into positions of influence, it's for a purpose. And Mordecai's request and rebuke to Esther is to remind her of that fact. And we need to be reminded of that fact. If we have positions of influence, we need to lean into them and ask the Lord, what is it that we should do with this influence? And know that Esther, using that influence, was putting her own life at danger. So she actually replies, starting in verse 16, it says, she replies to Mordecai, it says, go gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. And I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. And Mordecai then went away and did everything that Esther had ordered him. And there's 3 things that I really kind of pull from this response and what's going on. One is that we should pursue positions of influence no matter the circumstances that we're in. Esther was in a terrible circumstance, but she still pursued the position of influence, the position of being able to excel. And, even though it was a terrible, terrible situation for her to be in. And I don't think that we tell people that often. We live in a society where it's kind of like we don't want to tell people hard truths. We want people to feel something and be comfortable being that thing. And if they can't, then there's something wrong with society. There's not something wrong with them. And pursuing influence is hard work. Pursuing influence requires study and application and character and relationships and all kinds of things that take time and effort. And some of us will have more influence than others, and some of us will have less, but we've been given influence for a purpose. So we should pursue more influence so that we could influence people and the world for Jesus Christ. We're also given positions by God to influence. And this is very important because I think that often we think of our work, we think of the place that we have in society simply as a position that is for us and our livelihood, or is for us and what we want to do. But our positions are given to us to influence. Your position is specifically positioned and given to you so that you could make an influence for the kingdom. And we need to think like Esther, who needed to be reminded that this is not so that you can be comfortable, not so that you can have food, not that you can have nice clothes and these kind of things and servants to wait on you. This is so that you can make an impact when the evil day comes. This is so that you can stand against the schemes of the enemy, so that you can protect the people of God, so that you can protect the innocent, so that you can make an impact and change the evils of the culture and redeem those for God. And then the last thing is that death, loss, and removal of influence are possible even when we are trying to use that influence for God. In fact, it is often the case that when we are trying to influence for God, that we will lose those things and become a martyr. That we will lose those things and people will have to be awoken by the tragedy of that, the injustice of that, in order to change society. And Esther was willing to do that. I love the line that she says at the end of verse 16, where it says, "And if I perish, I perish." She was given to the course of action, no matter what the results were. I was having a conversation with a very good friend of mine years ago now, and we were talking about making an impact in society and how we are to be, or how we as Christians could be involved in pushing back against some of the, just evil ideas and thoughts and legislations and practices and just, all of these things. Like how can we as Christians push back? And he made a comment to me that he said that my impression of the world was much more hopeful than his. And what he meant is that I thought that my pushing back would change things. And I remember just thinking, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if our attempt to influence for God changes the world for the better or not. In fact, it could make it worse in some scenarios because the world is an evil place. But it doesn't change the way that we are called to live. Like if Esther doesn't stand for truth, then she has failed. What the king does is up to the king. And there are times in our lives and in history, in biblical history, and definitely in the history of the world, that people have done the right things and been met with evil over and over and over again. But that doesn't change what is right and what is wrong and how we are called to live in the positions of influence we have. So I encourage you guys, assess your life. Look at the positions of influence that God has given you over your children, over your friends, things that you can do with that influence to share the truth of Christ, to correct the evils being done around you, and to really change both people's hearts, but also the world, the soil, the cultural soil that is around us, so that we can make true, lasting impact for the kingdom of God. Hope that you guys enjoyed this. Like, share, subscribe. If there's someone specific that you think has a position of influence and needs to hear this, we encourage you, just share it with them. Share it with them directly. Send them a link, a text. We hope that you subscribe to the channel. We want to push those algorithms so that our voice, our influence can become greater and that your influence is part of that. It's part of helping that happen. So God bless you guys. We hope that you were encouraged. We hope that you go out and are salt and light in everything that you do and that you make impacts for the kingdom every day. We love you. We pray that we'll see you in the next video. And I'm talking still, so we're going to wrap it up.